What happens when a Hollywood legend, a man who built his entire career on grit and respect, walks into a late-night studio and gets turned into the punchline on live TV? When Sylvester Stallone comes face-to-face with Jimmy Kimmel, what begins as lighthearted banter explodes into a verbal showdown where every word hits like a punch. Because this isn't just a late-night clash. This is pride versus mockery, truth versus performance. This isn't just television. This is a reckoning between two men who refuse to back down. The studio lights flashed bright as Jimmy Kimmel walked onto the stage, grinning like he owned the night. The band finished their intro, the crowd clapped on cue, and Jimmy leaned into the camera with his usual swagger. "Tonight, folk," he said, "we've got the man, the myth, the mumble, Sylvester Stallone." The audience laughed, some cheering, some already pulling out their phones. Then Stallone stepped out from the wings. His walk was slow, controlled, steady. He gave a polite nod to the crowd, shook Jimmy's hand, and sat down. "Good to be here," he said in that rough voice. Jimmy started light. "So, Sly," he said, his grin widening. "Another action movie, huh? Didn't we see that back in, 1985? The audience laughed, right on cue. Stallone looked at him for a moment, then gave a small smirk. "Yeah," he said, "and people still talk about it. That's called legacy, Jimmy. Not reruns." The laughter this time wasn't the same. It was sharper, more real. Jimmy chuckled, pretending to brush it off, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Legacy," he repeated, forcing another laugh. "Or a really long franchise." It was meant as another joke, but something in his tone felt pointed. Stallone didn't laugh. He just leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, but his stare locked like a fighter reading his opponent. The tension wasn't loud, but it was there. Jimmy shifted in his chair, the grin still plastered on his face, but his body language gave him away. He was trying to keep control of the room. Stallone leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, voice low but clear enough to cut through the noise. "Careful, Jimmy," he said. "You confuse longevity with redundancy, and that's how you end up forgotten before the next commercial break." The words hung in the air. For a second, nobody laughed. Then a few nervous chuckles scattered through the audience, but it wasn't the same kind of laughter as before. Jimmy shifted in his chair, trying to shake off the tension. He forced a grin and reached for an easy laugh. "So, Rocky, written in 3 days, right? What did you do, run out of crayons?" The crowd burst into laughter, more out of habit than humor. Stallone didn't move. His face didn't even twitch. He just looked at Jimmy, quiet and steady. "I wrote it while sleeping in a bus station," he said slowly, his tone calm but cutting. "Sold my dog to survive. Crayons were for people who could afford to dream comfortably." The laughter died instantly. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was heavy. You could feel the audience realize they'd just laughed at something they shouldn't have. Jimmy froze for a beat, eyes darting between Stallone and the cameras, searching for a way to fix the moment. "Hey," he said quickly, raising both hands with a nervous chuckle. "I was just kidding." Stallone's gaze didn't soften. He leaned forward slightly, voice low but sharp enough to slice through the awkward quiet. "That's your problem, Jimmy," he said. "You mistake cruelty for comedy." The audience stayed still, not daring to make a sound. Someone let out a small laugh. It died halfway through, swallowed by the tension. Jimmy's grin stayed on, but it looked different now. Forced, stretched, almost desperate. His eyes flicked toward the control booth for reassurance that wasn't coming. Stallone didn't flinch. His calm was louder than Jimmy's jokes had ever been. The energy in the room had changed completely. Stallone leaned back, crossing his arms. "See, I fought to be here," he said, his voice steady. "You were invited." It wasn't angry, just honest. And that made it hit even harder. Jimmy blinked, caught off guard. "I mean, come on, Sly," he said, his tone trying for light but landing defensive. "You're taking this too seriously." Stallone's reply came quick, almost like a jab. "Yeah," he said, "and maybe that's why I still matter." The audience reacted before Jimmy could. A ripple of claps and gas filled the room. Not applause, not laughter, just shock. Jimmy's smile froze again, but this time it wasn't nerves. It was realization. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, still forcing that signature grin, even though the energy in the room had shifted. He tried to act unfazed, his tone dripping with mock confidence. "You've made more sequels than I've made jokes," he said, letting the line hang as the crowd erupted in laughter. It was meant to sting, but Stallone didn't even flinch. He waited for the noise to fade, then leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but carrying weight. "Exactly," he said. "People remember mine." The crowd broke into cheers. It wasn't the polite laughter Jimmy was used to. It was the kind of reaction that comes when someone lands a punch no one saw coming. Jimmy's grin stiffened. "Oh, that's good," he said, forcing a chuckle. "That's real good. Maybe you should start writing my monologue." Stallone tilted his head, smirking faintly. "If I did," he said, "I'd probably have to teach you how to deliver it too." The audience howled. Jimmy's smile faded just enough for people to notice. Jimmy crossed his arms, pretending to stay relaxed, but his tone turned colder. "You ever worry people just see you as that tough guy who mumbles his way through every movie?" he asked, exaggerating his voice into a cartoonish growl. "You know, the 'Yo, Adrian' thing?" The audience laughed again, but this time it was uneasy. Stallone's expression didn't change. He looked at Jimmy, the silence stretching until it became uncomfortable. Then he spoke, his voice low, deliberate, steady as a drumbeat. "I'd rather mumble with purpose," he said, "than talk loud with nothing to say." The room went still. Jimmy's fake smile cracked for half a second before he let out a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Hey, take it easy, Sly," he said, trying to recover. "It's just jokes." Stallone didn't move. "No," he said quietly. "That's what you tell yourself so you don't have to call it what it is." Jimmy blinked. "What's that?" he asked. "Cowardice," Stallone replied. "You hide behind humor so you never have to mean anything." The audience gasped. A few nervous chuckles followed, but even those died quickly. Jimmy leaned forward, trying to get the upper hand. "Come on, man," he said, his tone now carrying a mix of sarcasm and irritation. "You've been rich for decades. You don't get to play the underdog anymore. You're not the fighter in the ring. You're the guy selling tickets." Stallone's expression hardened. "Money doesn't erase scars, Jimmy," he said, his voice cold but calm. "It just buys quieter rooms to remember them in." Jimmy shifted, caught off guard by the weight of that line. "Oh, come on," he said, forcing another grin. "You're not still pretending to be that guy from Philly, are you? That whole scrappy underdog thing. It's an act." Stallone leaned in, elbows on his knees, eyes sharp. "You think I was acting when I wrote that script on a borrowed typewriter?" he said. "You think I was acting when I sold my dog to eat? You call that an act? That's not Hollywood, Jimmy. That's survival." Jimmy's smirk faltered completely. He tried one last swing. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think you can't let go. You built your image on being the fighter, but maybe it's time to admit you're just another millionaire clinging to an old story." Stallone leaned back, crossing his arms, and for a few seconds he just looked at Jimmy. No smile, no emotion, just stillness. Then he said quietly, "You're right. I did build something. The difference is I built it from nothing. You inherited your spotlight from people laughing at your jokes. I earned mine from people believing in my fight." The audience erupted, not with laughter, but with applause. It was raw and loud and completely unplanned. Jimmy sat there, the color draining from his face, the smile gone. He opened his mouth to fire back, but hesitated. Stallone leaned in one last time, his voice steady but cutting. "You make fun of fighters, Jimmy," he said, "but at least fighters bleed for what they believe in." "What do you bleed for?" The studio went dead silent. Jimmy sat still, staring at Stallone, the confidence gone, the mask stripped away. Jimmy's grin was gone now. His voice came out sharper, his tone colder. "So what?" he said, leaning forward. "You think I don't earn what I do?" The air in the studio thickened. Stallone didn't blink. He tilted his head slightly, eyes calm but piercing. "I think you talk about struggle like it's a prop," he said. "You wear it when it's convenient." Real fighters don't rehearse their pain for applause. The line hit like a hammer. A few people in the audience gasped. Others looked around, unsure if they should laugh or stay quiet. Jimmy opened his mouth to fire back, but the words didn't come fast enough. Stallone wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. Every pause felt like pressure. Every word landed like a hit. Jimmy forced a chuckle, trying to regain control. "Hey, this isn't therapy, Sly. It's entertainment," he said, waving his hand as if to dismiss the moment. But Stallone wasn't playing along anymore. His tone was calm, low, but it cut deeper than any shout could. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "You hide behind laughter because you're afraid of silence. You think if people stop laughing, they'll see through you." The crowd murmured, some in shock, others nodding, sensing the shift. Jimmy shifted in his chair, the confidence in his posture fading. His jaw tightened, and his fingers tapped nervously against the desk. This was supposed to be his ring, but Stallone had taken it over without even standing up. Then Jimmy fired his next shot, and it was personal. "You're bitter," he said, his voice rising. "You're mad because Hollywood moved on without you." He leaned back, thinking he'd finally landed one. But Stallone only smiled. Not amused, just tired. The kind of smile that comes from someone who's been through real fights and knows when his opponent is swinging out of desperation. "No, Jimmy," he said quietly. "I moved on without needing Hollywood." Then after a short pause, his eyes locked onto Jimmy's. "Can you say the same about your cue cards?" The line was a knife. Quiet, clean, but deadly. The audience reacted instantly. Half gasped, half clapped, and a few laughed out of pure disbelief. Jimmy froze for a second, blinking, the lights reflecting off his face as if he'd just realized he wasn't the one in control anymore. His smirk vanished completely, replaced by the look of a man realizing he'd stepped into a fight he couldn't win. Stallone leaned back, composed, almost calm, but was waiting to see if Jimmy will get up. The silence between them was louder than any monologue Jimmy had ever delivered. Jimmy's face had lost that usual late-night glow. His grin was thin now, strained at the edges. He leaned forward, his tone shifting from showman to challenger. "We call out hate here, Sly," he said, trying to sound firm, moral, and unshakable. "That's not politics. That's morality." The audience gave a polite clap, but even they could feel the tension simmering. Stallone didn't react. He just stared at Jimmy, calm, unreadable, but with that look of someone deciding whether to swing. Then in a tone quiet enough to make everyone lean in, he said, "No, Jimmy, that's branding." Jimmy blinked. "Branding?" Stallone nodded slowly, voice turning harder with each word. "Yeah, you sell outrage like it's merchandise. Every night you pick a villain, and every punchline's another commercial break. You're not defending morality, you're cashing in on it." The audience murmured, half gasping, half unsure if they should applaud. Jimmy forced a chuckle, but there was no warmth in it. "That's rich," he said, "coming from a guy who's made a living punching people for 2 hours straight." Stallone's smile returned, thin and dangerous. "Yeah," he said, "but at least my punches were honest." The room erupted for a second, half cheers, half disbelief. Jimmy's smirk faltered. He leaned in, tone sharpening like a blade. "You think standing on a movie set pretending to save the world makes you some kind of philosopher?" he snapped. Stallone didn't blink. "No," he said evenly, "but it taught me how to tell the difference between performance and purpose." "You might want to learn that someday," the crowd gasped again. Jimmy laughed, but the sound cracked midway. "Wow, Sly. You've been sitting on that one, huh? Trying to prove you're more than just a muscle with a microphone?" Stallone leaned closer, eyes locked on Jimmy's. "You can call me whatever you want," he said, his voice low, controlled. "But I didn't build my career mocking people who can't fight back." Jimmy's brow furrowed. "Oh, come on. It's a comedy show, not a courtroom." Stallone didn't flinch. "No," he said, "it's a courtroom disguised as comedy. And every night, you play judge, jury, and executioner, smiling while you hang people with your punchlines." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Stallone tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk curling his lip. "Tell me something, Jimmy," he said quietly. Do you rehearse your moral outrage before or after makeup? The line hit like a sledgehammer. The crowd gasped, a sharp collective intake of breath. Jimmy froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He laughed, but it was nervous, brittle. You really want to go there? He asked, forcing bravado. Stallone shrugged. You started it. Jimmy straightened in his chair, gripping his cards so tightly they bent at the corners. At least I stand for something, he said finally, raising his voice. The crowd clapped, eager to diffuse the tension. Stallone waited for the noise to die, then leaned in again, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. You stand on people to do it, he said. The crowd erupted again, half in shock, half in awe. The laughter was gone now, replaced by something raw, electric. Jimmy's face went red. Careful, old man, he hissed, his tone no longer playful. Stallone's eyes hardened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Careful's not in my dictionary, he said quietly. You can mock me, you can mock my movies, but don't ever confuse your spotlight with strength. I've fought for every inch I have. You were handed yours under studio lights. The audience broke into scattered applause, unsure whose side to take. Jimmy sat back, eyes flashing with anger, but there was something else behind it. Fear. He tried to regain ground, his voice trembling with forced sarcasm. You're something else, Sly. For a guy who's supposed to be promoting a movie, you sure sound like you're campaigning for sainthood. Stallone gave a slow smile. Nah, he said. I'm just tired of people mistaking noise for meaning. Then he looked straight into the camera. Not at Jimmy, not at the crowd, but directly at the millions watching at home. You want to know the truth about fame? He said. It doesn't change you. It just shows who you really are. For a moment, the entire studio froze. No sound, no music, no jokes. Jimmy sat there, eyes darting, searching for his next line. But there was nothing left to say. Stallone had turned the stage from a talk show into a showdown, and Jimmy was on the losing end. Jimmy leaned forward again, this time without the smile. His tone was defensive now, clipped and sharp. You talk about accountability, he said, his voice cutting through the air. But who holds you accountable, huh? The words hung heavy between them. Stallone didn't react right away. He just stared back, his expression unreadable. The kind of stillness that makes people nervous. Then quietly he said, Life did. His voice was low, steady, but it carried the weight of years. You wouldn't last a week outside your writer's room. The audience gasped. A few tried to laugh, but the sound died quickly. Jimmy forced a smirk, trying to act unfazed. Oh, come on, he said, waving his cue card. You think you've cornered the market on struggle? It's just jokes, Sly. But Stallone wasn't letting him off the hook this time. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on Jimmy. Every night, he said, his tone sharpening, you mock people who can't answer back. You take cheap shots from behind that desk, and you call it courage. But that's not courage, Jimmy. His words slowed, deliberate, like a boxer pacing his punches. That's theater. Jimmy laughed, but there was no humor left in it. It's comedy, he snapped, raising his voice, trying to reclaim the upper hand. It's what I do. Stallone's reply came instantly, like a knife through the air. No, Jimmy, he said, leaning in so close his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. It's cowardice with a laugh track. The words landed like a knockout blow. The audience froze. Not one sound, not a single nervous chuckle. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Jimmy blinked, stunned, his mouth opening as if to respond. But nothing came out. The rhythm that had carried him through thousands of interviews, setup, punchline, applause, was gone. For the first time, the silence didn't work for him. It crushed him. He tried to smile, but the mask wouldn't hold. His face tightened, eyes darting toward the crew, looking for some cue, some signal that this could still be salvaged. None came. Stallone sat back slowly, his calm returning like a man who knew he'd already won. The silence stretched, longer and heavier, until it became something more than awkward. It became truth. Jimmy's grin collapsed under its weight, his confidence stripped away. He looked across the desk and realized what everyone in the room already knew. Stallone hadn't come to entertain. He'd come to expose. Jimmy's patience had completely worn thin. His voice cut sharper now, the friendliness gone, the pretense burned away. "You think being old gives you wisdom?" he snapped, leaning across the desk. "You're just a relic pretending to be relevant." The crowd gave a nervous laugh, unsure if it was still a joke or a jab. Stallone didn't blink. He didn't even flinch. He just tilted his head slightly, that calm, dangerous look settling over him again. "And you," he said quietly, "you're a puppet pretending to be brave." The air in the studio seemed to stop moving. Even the cameras paused for a heartbeat, as if afraid to catch what came next. Jimmy's nostrils flared. His smile was gone completely now, replaced by something closer to anger. "You sound like a man who can't take a joke," he said, his tone shaking between irritation and desperation. Stallone leaned forward, eyes locked. "And you sound like one who hides behind them." The words hit like a body blow, direct, controlled, and personal. Jimmy forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "Oh, that's good," he said, voice tightening. "You really think you're better than me, huh?" Stallone's reply was calm, almost gentle, but it landed harder than any shout. "No," he said. "I think I'm real." "That's worse for you." The audience reacted instinctively, a mix of gasps, murmurs, and a few claps that quickly died off. Everyone could feel it now. The tension wasn't just awkward, it was dangerous. Jimmy tried to recover, stammering out a few words, but Stallone was already standing. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his feet. The movement was quiet but powerful, like the air shifting before a storm. He looked down at Jimmy, who was still seated, and said in a voice so steady it carried through the silence, "You've mistaken applause for truth. The louder they clap, the less you listen." The room went dead still. No laughter, no applause. Just the sound of breathing and the faint hum of the studio lights. Jimmy stared up at him, mouth slightly open, but nothing came out. For once, the man who made a living out of words had none left. Stallone's gaze didn't waver. He gave a small nod, almost to himself, then stepped back. The show wasn't over, but the fight was. And everyone in that room, including Jimmy, knew exactly who'd won. The silence lingered like smoke. Jimmy's hand gripped the edge of his desk, his voice shaky but defiant. "You can't just walk out," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't sound like him. "We're live." Stallone rose slowly, his shadow stretching across the stage, calm and unhurried. He looked down at Jimmy, his tone even. "I've walked out of tougher fights than this." The audience held its breath. No one moved. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. Jimmy leaned forward, desperate now, his words trembling with frustration. "Hey, come on, Sly. It's just a show. Don't take it so personally." Stallone stepped closer, resting his hands on the edge of the desk, towering over the host. "That's your problem, Jimmy," he said quietly. "You think everything's a joke because it's safer that way. You don't host a show anymore. You host an execution disguised as humor. And tonight," he paused, locking eyes with him, "I'm not your next victim." The crowd murmured softly, their unease shifting into awe. Stallone straightened his jacket, turned toward the wings, and began to walk away. Jimmy tried one last attempt to save himself. "Oh, come on, Sly, don't do this," he called out, the nervous smile twitching back onto his face. "We can talk about this." "You'll look bad walking off." Stallone stopped just before the curtain. He turned, looking back at Jimmy one last time. The studio lights caught the glint in his eyes, that mix of exhaustion and finality. "No, Jimmy," he said, his voice calm, but with enough weight to silence the room again. "You wanted a viral moment. Congratulations. You just became the joke." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Stallone turned and disappeared behind the curtain, leaving nothing but the echo of his footsteps. The cameras stayed fixed on Jimmy, who sat there frozen. The smirk gone, the words gone, everything gone. The band didn't play, the audience didn't clap. The only thing left was the sound of a man realizing that for the first time, someone else had taken the stage, and left with his dignity intact. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. The red light above the camera was still glowing, but it didn't matter. The show was over, even if the broadcast wasn't. Jimmy stood frozen behind his desk, cue cards trembling slightly in his hands. His trademark grin, the one that had carried him through every awkward moment, every on-air disaster, was gone. In its place was something raw and unfamiliar. Silence. The audience didn't clap. They didn't laugh. They just stared at him, unsure whether they were still watching a comedy show or a public unraveling. Jimmy swallowed hard, his throat dry. He looked toward the control booth as if someone could save him, but no one moved. The laughter he had relied on for years, automatic, loyal, predictable, had vanished. The silence felt like judgment. He shuffled his cards, pretending to look busy, pretending he still had control. "We'll," he started, his voice cracking. "We'll be right back." The words came out small, hollow, stripped of all the charm they used to carry. The teleprompter scrolled uselessly, the band stayed still, and the crowd remained frozen in that uneasy quiet. For the first time in his career, Jimmy Kimmel, the man who always had a punchline, always had the last word, had nothing left to say. He stood there under the bright studio lights, surrounded by cameras but completely alone. What had started as another night of entertainment had ended as something else entirely. A reckoning, live on air. By sunrise, the clip had already taken over the internet. The headline was everywhere. "Stallone walks out. Kimmel humbled on live TV." Within hours, it racked up millions of views across every platform. Some called Stallone unprofessional, saying he'd lost his temper. Others hailed him as a legend for saying what no one else in Hollywood dared to. The debate was instant, passionate, and endless. Talk shows replayed the moment on loop. News anchors dissected every expression, every pause, every breath. Overnight, a routine interview had become a cultural flashpoint, a clash between old-school grit and modern showbiz ego. Twitter was chaos. One half of the internet flooded timelines with praise. "Stallone just ended fake Hollywood with one line. That's not a meltdown. That's a man with principles." The other half accused him of being out of touch. "He's just angry the world changed." Classic celebrity ego trip. Hashtags trended for days. Hashtag Stallone walkout. Hashtag Kimmel humiliated. Hashtag Hollywood reckoning. Memes exploded. One showed Stallone walking off with the caption, "Strength exits quietly." Another showed Jimmy staring blankly at the desk with the words, "When the joke hits back." As the dust settled, the divide became clear. Stallone wasn't just a movie star anymore. He was a symbol of defiance. The face of old Hollywood refusing to kneel to the performance-driven culture that turned sincerity into spectacle. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel found himself at the center of a storm he couldn't control. The man known for laughing at everyone else had become the meme himself. The image of him sitting, speechless, as Stallone walked out was everywhere. Captioned simply, "When the joke goes too far." Days later, a quote from Stallone's walkout went viral again. The one line that seemed to outlive the chaos. "Strength isn't loud, Jimmy. It's quiet, and it walks away when the noise gets cheap." That single sentence defined the moment. It was replayed, quoted, printed, turned into T-shirts and reaction posts. But more than that, it left a mark. Late-night TV, once untouchable, suddenly felt smaller, exposed, fragile. For the first time in years, people weren't talking about who told the best joke. They were talking about who had the courage to stop laughing first. If you thought late-night TV was all jokes and charm, think again. That night when Sylvester Stallone walked off Jimmy Kimmel's stage, Hollywood itself took a hit. Was Stallone out of line, or just the only one brave enough to tell the truth? Watch the full story and decide for yourself. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the moments that expose what really happens when the cameras stop rolling.